Hey everybody, and welcome to How to DM on this glorious Saturday.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm Dustin.
I'm Devin, and we're here to teach you DMing 101 at Meeple Madness.
Yeah, we are the co-DMs of D4, a live streaming D&D show.
Yeah,
That we do
podcast, live
podcast,
stream,
yeah,
YouTube.
actual play, whatever the terminology is.
Yeah, a Codium on Sundays at 7. You can check us out at D4 RPG
yeah.
on Twitch.
But I guess a little backstory about us and why we're sitting up here and talking to all you wonderful peeps here in the Apothecary Room and out there in Internet Land. It's a real place. It's a
Internet Land is a real place. I watched Wreck-It Ralph. But yeah, we met a long time ago at a haunted house, and then he annoyed me to come play a LARP, and I was like, I'll never be that nerdy, and then I tried it once, and I got hooked, and then I stopped being a player and joined him running a game for like 10 years, and at that point we realized, hey, our brains kind of work really well together, so let's continue that. Then he ran a D&D game for me, and then he went out to D&D Live and came back and said, hey, what if we
co-DM'd.
What if we tried this?
What if we did this? What if we streamed our next campaign? But yeah, so I've been DMing for 20 years now, maybe more. Now, probably more.
I've only been D&D DMing for like 5 years, but I've been playing for a long time, and then I also helped run a LARP, which is like live action D&D.
Yeah,
so
yeah, for 10 plus years.
If I add that, then yeah, 15.
Yeah. So there are many facets of DMing. There's many styles of DMing. There's really no, there's only a handful of how I would say like wrong ways to do it, and that's just being trying not on a toxic level, which you'd want to try to do, which is in my opinion DM versus players.
Yeah, never want to do DM versus players. As much power as you have behind the screen, it's not a story that you are running for the players. It's a story that you're all collaboratively telling together. So it's a lot of give and take. It's never supposed to be like, this is my story, you must play it, because that's not fun.
Yeah, one of the things whenever I'm talking to people about DMing, the very first thing I say is like, you're not telling a story for your players. You're telling a story with your players, and their actions are going to change the story. And so when you are writing a story, you always want to go into it with, hey, you need with a little bit of flexibility because the players will do something you do not plan on.
And if you
100%, it will happen.
And if you force them to like not let them have their choices, it's called railroading, and that's not fun. The other version is like complete sandbox, and that's where you prepare very little, you have little notes, and then it's kind of really everything's up to the players. Some people like playing that way. We kind of like to play right in between, and our joke is that you can hear the train but can't see the tracks.
And so what sandboxing and railroading it kind of correlates to, for those who don't know what he's saying. And so basically there's a track, and the story always is on those tracks. It's always going in this direction. No matter what the players do, they're always going to have this encounter at this time. They're always going to do this. Like, no matter if they do X, Y, and Q, the next letter will always be C, and then D, and then E, and then F. And in some formats that is like necessary if you're like doing a short one shot or a time restraint module. Sometimes it's like you have to stay on those tracks because you only have 2 hours to get through this, and you have to hit A, B, C, and D in order to finish it. But if you're doing a long form narrative, it's best to, like we say, to hear the train but not necessarily see the tracks.
And to explain that is that your story, or the story main narrative, whether you're using a campaign guide or one that you've written, the characters in that, the NPCs, their choices and their plans are still moving forward. No matter what the PCs do. However, the PCs will definitely affect that. So there'll be different changes and things like that. You just have to adapt the story that facilitates the choices the characters have made and the consequences that and benefits from their choices. So if they figured out your plan and they stop it, well, it looks like you got to come up with a new BBEG because they got smart. And hey,
yeah, and it
congrats
happens.
to them.
One of the things I always I like to tell people is your players don't know what's behind the screen. So if they figure it out, or if they go a different direction and you had an encounter planned, just put that encounter in a different location. It doesn't necessarily have to be in, the basement of this manor that they were going to go in to clear out the rats. Maybe it's in a different location that they're going to encounter it.
Now it's in an attic.
Yep. And they're squirrels, not rats. Yep.
Boom, done.
And so it's a lot of times I hear people, it's like, oh, well, I get frustrated because, they didn't take the clues that I put in front of them. I can't give them a bigger spoon. They're not taking it. They just want to go and shop and yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, are they having fun? Are your players having fun?
Yeah.
Then you done your job as a dungeon master, a game master. Storyteller,
keeper, whatever you want to call
any
it.
facet of the title, because if your players are having fun,
they're enjoying the game,
then you have done a great job as that storyteller. And another facet that I like to tell people is be open and communicative with your players.
Yeah, one of the things that we do in between sessions that makes our life a lot easier is I'll go up to our players and be like, hey, what did you think of the session? Awesome. We call it get it after the catch. Kind of, do we need to, we'll get into aftercare in a second, but talk about that. And then more so, hey, where's your character now? What are their goals and their long-term goals? And then what is their immediate goals? What do you want to do next session? Because they tell me everything that they want to do, and boom, I'll help, write some notes for that. And then I'll add in like things that we have planned to kind of like, oh, well, we really need to drop this, this hint, or we need to make sure that we hit this, like this narrative beat.
Yep.
And we can put it into what things that they want to do instead of forcing it, railroading it with things that we had planned. You just mix the two together.
It makes it cohesive and flow a lot simpler. And that, like, of the many years that I have been DMing, that has been probably the greatest a boon, word I'm looking for, to come from, just because, one, your players feel like they're contributing to the story, and they give you content to write and to prep and prepare, and you're like, oh, cool. So it's like, so you do want to go shopping? Well, awesome. So we'll do a shopping episode, but this, clue for the overarching narrative, I'm going to put as an item in the shop you're going to. I'm going to make the shopkeeper tied to it. I'm going to put a shop, like another person in there that,
a shoplifter that's tied to the person, or even adjacently where it's, their family's being pressured by said person. And he kind of has this like, little tangled web, but it also feels more real, like in the real world type of situation, because also if you make things extremely railroaded and by the book, it feels stagnant.
Yep.
It feels forced.
Branching off of that and going back even further into communication, like if you are not having fun as a storyteller to your players, if they're just, they're being too murdery, and they're just trying to kill everything that they come into, the murder hobo trope as it is referred to, or they're just, you yourself aren't having fun, talk to your players and be like, hey guys, this is the type of story that I would like to tell. Is there any way that we can compromise? And if they're like, well, we don't want to play that story, we want to play this, maybe it's you want to, like,
try and find that middle ground so that both you and the players have fun. Now, this is a DM 101. Let's go to players for a second. Don't be that player that's always, this is what my character would do. It's good to have morals and goals and things like that, but you too also have to be flexible. You don't want to be so rigid that you make it not fun for everyone around you. if everybody's like, hey, you're kind of being a little too murdery, or hey, you're being a little too pious with your zealousy and your paladin. It's kind of like making it a little bit hard for us to have fun. Find a middle ground between your players, stuff like that.
It is, and finding that balance, like as a dungeon master, to tell the stories for the individual characters, have them write backstories, have them send you backstories, and if they're not like some players aren't, they're like, I don't really do backstories. Luckily, in 5th edition D&D at least, you have a background you choose, you have personality traits. Take that and just run with it. Okay, you were a soldier. Well, I'm gonna put some backstory on there and start going into that. And then if you do have players who try to do that, like I'm the main character in this story, there is, it is a group effort, and the party itself may at times be the main characters, and they may not be, because your world may be vast and they are small fish in a large ocean, but can have ripples in that ocean. But if like you're telling a story on a certain character's backstory, and then the spotlight is on them and a character is trying to overshadow them, talk to that character and just be like, hey, this is their story. Maybe let's kind of step back just a bit and let them experience their story. Your chapter will be coming up, or you've already had your chapter, et cetera, and just have that open communication. And if you have that from the gate, then it won't be blindsided from your players.
Yeah, and you don't have to tell the player, like, no, you can't do this. Just be like, hey, instead of you being the one that's doing the actions during this sequence of events, because it's not your backstory, maybe have that conversation with the other player in play and be like, and try and strategize and let the person who is being highlighted with their backstory at that point kind of just make it in play instead of you stepping on their toes.
Yep. It's I love to, speaking of like setting those boundaries early and like being open communicative, session zeros are very, very important. You can utilize it to help build characters for new players who have not experienced playing the game before.
You can weave player backstories together, so there's already a connection, so you're not all just meeting in a bar for the first time, which can cause some tension because it's like, if we were to go to a bar right now and just 5 strangers get together and then you're forced to work together, you're learning to, but if you already have backstories and you already have woven connections, it's a lot easier to just narratively jump into that.
Session zeros can be great because set the boundaries immediately. This is the story that I would like to tell with you all. It'd be like, this is going to be a combat heavy, campaign, or this is going to be a role play with very little combat, or it's going to be a mix of the two, and yada yada yada. So that way your players know what type of story you all are going to be telling together.
It also establishes setting. What is magic like in your world? Is it new? Is it very old? Is it non-existent? All of these things that you can establish into your world. Is it futuristic? Is it medieval? Is it a blend of the two? All of that should be established in session 0 instead of session 1, because players will create characters in their mind of what they think the world is going to be. And if they build a character for Lord of the Rings setting and you have a cyberpunk or Blade Runner setting, they don't really blend well, so you have to have that conversation in the beginning.
It also helps if you're DMing for a new group, or if you have new players in your gaming group. It helps just make them feel welcomed and not just throwing them to the wolves and being like, well, welcome to this gaming group that's been playing for 10 years, you're brand new, good luck, buddy. It just kind of helps ease tensions, and makes people feel welcome.
Also in session 0, something that's very important, it's kind of a newer thing to D&D, but it's very good, and that is like player boundaries and DM boundaries and
lines and veils.
Basically what players are comfortable with playing and what they're not comfortable with playing. That could be, and a line is like hard line. I do not want to play in a game that involves
this.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to see animals being killed. Okay, cool. We won't do that. Veil is something that's kind of like in between. Like, I can handle it as long as it's not too much. You want to have those conversations. There's many resources online that just gives you a full sheet, and you can even do it anonymously, so you don't have to have the conversation at the table, and they can only send it to you. But it's also, I would say, it's good to have those conversations openly, because that means that your other players know what to incorporate in their backstories and things like that.
Yeah, so it's just a great thing. And again, it's just all about, table comfortability. And if everyone is like, I'm fine with whatever, and that's across the board, then great, and you can do whatever. But it's just, you just want to be respectful because you want to have fun together. There are multiple types of DMs, ways of DMing. There is what I like to refer to shoot from the hip. No prep, no plan, whatever, just
improv D&D.
Improv D&D. You don't come in with a plan. You just yes and whatever your players do.
And some people are really good at that skill. Shout out to Ethan, one of our players. He the way he creates a game is he'll have 2 sentences. And he'll be like, it's basically a setting and sentence, and then like a plot sentence, and that's it. That's all he has. Yep. And the rest he just makes off the top of his head, and he's really good. I can't do that.
And then there is the other opposite, and that is just over prepping. You spend hours writing out descriptions. You try to think every response that every player is going to have to this NPC or this encounter and write that out. And you just over prep and over prepare to make sure that you are ready for no matter what happens. And then the players are going to do the one thing that you don't have prepped and prepared. It happens. But that at least allows you to have those. If you are like that, great. And it gives you that purple prose of descriptions, and you're able to really build an immersive atmosphere to the thing you're doing if you aren't able to just come up with it off the top of your head.
Yeah, it also allows you to like really think about how you're incorporating each little detail, and you can do what we like to do, which is you put in just enough details and crumbs that are scattered enough so that most people don't see them. But in the end, when it all comes together, the player goes, you can watch it click in their brain like, oh no.
Yep, and you can be like that.
It's like the meme of Snape.
Always.
But yeah, and then there's the middle ground, which is probably like where everybody should, or not should, but the easiest is you prep, but the prep is flexible in the sense that you can improv, and that's more so like bullet point prepping, where you're like, okay, they said they want to go shopping. When they go to this type of shop, it doesn't even have to be an elaborate note of that. Just this type of shop. This is where the shoplifter is. This is what they're getting, and this is why. And it doesn't even have to be just quick 1-sentence notes, and then you can play off of that. The one thing I would say prep is names.
Yeah.
You have a list of NPC names.
Yep.
It doesn't even matter if it's plug. You like literally just have a sheet that you can reference and be like, this new character is this. However, make sure you remember what names you assign certain characters.
One of the things that I like to do is take just an index card and just have name, description, voice, accent used if you did give them a voice or an accent. Voices and accents are not necessary to telling a good story. Some people can do it, some people can't. A great kind of a way to get around that I've seen people who aren't able to give like various voices or accents is they use hats or costume props or anything like that. So they put on a different hat, or they put on a false beard or a jacket for various NPCs.
Or they'll just change their posture. Also, you can just do it in the description. Like if you say a 6'7" towering man with that's bald, covered in tattoos and ashen gray skin, and he walks with purpose and poise. If you use that description every time, eventually your players will know exactly who that NPC is, and you don't have to do a voice or anything. They're like, oh, that's the Goliath noble that does this, yada yada yada.
But having even if you don't have index cards and you're using a laptop to run your stuff, I cannot. Like, Google Docs is the greatest thing that
Shout out to Google Docs.
Hashtag not sponsored. But it auto saves, especially with us being Codiums. I can see what he's typing, he can see what I'm typing, and so we're constantly able to update the document, and we can work offline, and then it'll upload our updates when we get online.
And you can have full NPCs, catalogs, what they've done, what knowledges they know, and then whenever you need to know, or like, oh hey, we want to go talk to Oingo Boingo again, and we're like, okay, type in Oingo Boingo, and then boop, here's all the information on them, what they know, where they are, so you don't accidentally say like, oh, hey, I remember that time you got that, and they're like, we never told you that. How do you know that? And then you got to come up with a reason why they know this. And
or you describe an NPC as a tabaxi that wasn't described the first time, and then all of a sudden he's a tabaxi.
And the first time you described him was a rotund man, so then it becomes a rotund tabaxi, which did happen.
That 100% happened.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, he was. But you know what? It is what it is. So things like that, which is okay. And if you do mess up, it's all good. Just make it work and flow. And
if you do mess up, you can be like, oh, if the players remember, be like, oh, you are correct. Let's do that. Or you could just make it fun and yes and. Yes and is an improv practice where something is said, and instead of saying no, but you say, you are correct, but also, or yes, and this is also true. So if they were like, last time it was this, you're like, you are correct. And then you just be like, and I'm not going to say anything else, because I'm going to come up with a reason why it
let
has
them
changed.
come up with it and just be like, yes, that's exactly what is the problem. Wait, did you get cursed? Yes, I got cursed.
Exactly. I got it cured, though, I think. But yeah, the tabaxi could have been illusioned because magic exists, or they could be a changeling. You never know.
Yep. It's a world of magics and wonder and fantasy. Make it work.
Yeah. The only time I would say try and be like hard and true with your facts is like really important notes for like the bad guy or the main narrative.
Yeah, Easter eggs or breadcrumbs that you're sprinkling in for the end game.
Yeah, NPCs and stuff like that are just kind of fun background, and you have fun with them. Do whatever.
And then I guess we'll talk a little bit about Codiuming, which is we may know a thing or two about.
Just a little bit. If you're interested, there are 3 different ways that we have found to Codium. The first one is there is the main narrative writer and the main mechanics person, the person that really knows the rules of D&D, and they're there to help streamline combat and roles and anything like that, where the narrative person is there just to be the actor and the storyteller of all the NPCs and things like that. The other is kind of like a trade-off. If we were all in a DM or a game together, and I am DMing one arc, and then I'd be like, okay, it's now, you're like, hey, I kind of want to do the next one. Like, all right, sure, cool. I don't need to know what you're writing, as long as you can touch this part of the story, or you can't touch this part of the story, and then you kind of trade off that way, and that's another
working in on that aspect, or the other person's playing an NPC that's like a long-term NPC that's with the group, but knows the story and can help guide in, various directions if that's the type of story that you need to tell. And then the third one is what we do, and that is kind of a mix of not a mix of two, because we don't do that one. It's 50-50 across the board.
Yeah.
And we write together. We're basically in a writer's room where we bounce ideas off of each other. We come up with combat scenarios and stats, and we write the narrative together, and then we sit up and we tell the story together. if we have, which the greatest aspect of that is playing two NPCs in the same room.
Yes.
And actually having someone to play off of and not doing all the voices and characters yourself is a lot easier, or it's wonderful and immersive for the players, but it's just a lot of fun to bounce off of each other. And if that's the case, if we're reading a description and we know that there's going to be like a dialogue of an NPC that Devin's playing, I'll read the description and then he'll immediately go into the dialogue of that NPC, and then I'll go back to descriptions, and then we'll kind of trade off on
and that way, there's a hard line between what is being said by the NPC and what some clues they might get, like, Dustin might elaborately say something, and then I'll say, and then he looks forlorn out a window, as if trying to remember something he can't quite place his mind to. And then the players will get that little narrative description, while also, Dustin can pantomime and act, but it gives them a little bit more detail and things like that. But also having two NPCs talk to each other is amazing. If you've ever had to be two NPCs talking to each other, it's a nightmare. Because then that's when you kind of really need to, like, either do a voice
or look this way,
yeah.
and then look this way, and then you put four NPCs in a room talking at the same time.
I still don't want to do that.
Why are you under the table? I'm the halfling. Oh, okay.
Other things is we've talked about, like, the writer's room aspect of us throwing out ideas and seeing what sticks and then creating story. I suggest everybody do that. Just don't let your players communicate with that person in the sense
someone
of, like,
to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, someone
be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Someone not playing the game, but someone who's like, hey, how does this sound? I'm thinking about putting this element into the next chapter or the next session.
Or I have this idea, but I can't quite figure out how to get there or what to do with it. Having another mind, just two brains are better than one, to help you through things. It's kind of like we all pull ideas and influences from all of the media we ingest, whether it be books or TV or movies or other games we've played in. Having that extra mind is just another person that thinks about all of those things, whether it's consciously or subconsciously.
And bouncing off of that, taking something that you saw in a movie, read in a book, and reskinning it for your story, sure, great, do it. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Even if your players realize what you're doing, just change enough so they can't predict what's about to happen. They're like, oh, I know this NPC is influenced by the king. Oh man, what are they called? Gungan.
Oh yeah, from Star Wars, Phantom Menace.
Yeah. You're like, oh, okay. The way he's speaking, the way he presents himself, the way he's described. But, we're not going to war with a bunch of droids.
Yeah.
So you don't know what's about to happen.
And that's okay. And have fun with it. Because, at the end of the day, someone has thought of your story somewhere in the world. We call it tapping into the ether.
Even if you don't know, it's happening simultaneously. I can't tell you how many times.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Have this really cool idea, and somebody else does it literally the Thursday before your Sunday.
And that's all right.
Hey, it happens.
It does, and there's nothing wrong with
there's
it.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yep. So have fun with it, and you're like, hey, I really like this. I really liked what they did on Firefly. I'm gonna do this, but instead of a spaceship, we're gonna make it an airship, or we're gonna make it a sailing ship, a pirate ship, or something along those lines. And a train, or Murder on the Orient Express. Let's take that and let's put it into my D&D game. We're gonna have a murder mystery where they're gonna go, and great, utilize it. But I think, does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns out there? in the world?
So I'm a newer DM. I've been doing it for about a year, and my characters just finished the starting arc of the Fendelvin starting town for the Essential Kitchen Dive.
The green dragon or the white dragon?
The white dragon.
Okay.
The white dragon. And one of the things you guys have touched on earlier that I wanted to ask you, and one of the things I've noticed, there's times where you can tell the characters realize and don't, is sometimes they feel like they aren't fully immersed. Sometimes you can feel like, sometimes they really get involved in the story, feel like they're there. And other times they can feel like they're just there doing actions, just going through the game aspect. And I know you guys talked about some tools about pulling your characters more into the story. What are some other tidbits you guys would have for doing some tools at your disposal to get characters more involved in the story, whether through their own stories or through the narrative?
So the first thing I would do is I would speak to that player out of game and be like, hey, what are things that you enjoy and what pulls you out of? So I know, first off, how to tailor to their likes and dislikes to keep them fully immersed. The second thing I would probably do is add things that specifically tie to their character, whether it be their ideals or their morals or things like that. It doesn't have to tie to their backstory. It doesn't have to be that deep, but it could be like my character, let's see, hates when people are like their voice is being overshadowed, or like so they see an NPC that constantly I'm trying and they're constantly overshadowed. That causes that player to be like, this is where I need to step in.
I know combat is a big disconnect for anyone not currently performing the action or on that turn. Make combat fun. Don't just be like, what'd you roll? Okay, cool, it does X damage. Describe what they're doing. If a magic user is casting a spell, go, how does your spell look? Have them describe what their magic looks. At the end of the day, as long as the mechanics is fine, whatever that magic looks like, that's just flavor text. It can be whatever, and let them describe it. And if they're like shy about it, give them just this awesome epic feeling of, this pulling from the weave and forming this, or, if they're an artificer making this contraption that does that. If they're a fighter or whatever, have them describe what they're doing, or describe for them that, they run up the leg, jump off, come down, drag their sword down the back of it, cutting a cut open on the creature.
They take an orc shield. They surf down a series of stairs while shooting arrows, looking like a super badass. Yeah, things like that.
To your guys' point, one of the things I've learned that is a good tool to use for that situation is if a character comes to a logical solution about the situation they're in, giving them some sort of bonus or additive thing to, you really figured that out. You piece the puzzles together for the situation. You get, X, Y, or Z because you did that. And that really, I feel like, helps bring them together. Yeah. So
there's an aspect of that we call it "Sing Us That Swan Song." So when a creature is killed, we're like, tell us how you.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. How do you fell this creature? How do you take them down?
Also, how do you want to do this?
Yep. Yes, the classic.
Yep.
Yes, the
classic. Another great thing, if you're in a solo scene with another character and it is in a public setting like a tavern or anything like that, and there are other NPCs there that aren't necessarily have the info that you need to deliver, or even it is, let the other players play NPCs. Let them build the narrative of where they are. Have them describe aspects of the tavern that you're in or something like that, to where they feel involved. Especially if there is like a challenge and it's like this, like one player is performing and there are other like contestants. Have the players play the contestants.
That's great.
If you have NPC allies, give the ally character sheets to the players and let them play the allies.
That's such a boon.
Then you don't have 17 people to keep track of.
Big combat scenes.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And that allows them to stay engaged. Put in other aspects that aren't just like, especially to combat or like a puzzle or something. Like if there's like a not really combat character, put a more role play encounter in the combat itself.
Yeah.
It's like, make it video game. It's like, oh, if you can decipher this arcane puzzle and do this, it's gonna, take the protective magic shield around the person, and it's gonna let the fighters make it more easy. So that way that they're over here figuring this out while the fight is happening over here.
Piggybacking off it, don't do that on every fight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, make those the big fights. That's really cool. Having multiple, like the big slogs, you don't want it to be a numbers game of like, I'm a big tank versus the amount of damage you can put out. The big, like, defining narrative moments are best for those multi-situational things. Also, some, if you're going to a cool ruin and stuff like that, a golem that has a multifaceted thing, but don't do it for every combat because it will get boring.
Yep.
Even though it's really cool, people will be like, oh, okay, it's this again. We got to figure it out, blah, 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 blah. You just want to keep things different, changing. That's another way to keep them engaged so that they don't know exactly what every combat's going to be. Having them help with descriptions is a big one.
Have them come up with like NPCs that they see. Yeah. It's like describe me one NPC that a person that you see in the tavern, things like that, and helping them tell the story with you. Travel, don't at times don't just fast travel. Don't just go, okay, you go for a week, now you're here. Let them use that time to build character and develop their characters. Make watches count to where give them time to roleplay amongst each other. They're like, okay, it's you and you. I have first watch. Do you guys want to talk about what you just experienced? Things like that. Put encounters along the way that helps with character development. It's not just a random encounter where you fight, but it's a roleplay encounter where they're traveling through the woods and there's someone trapped under a log. Is that someone who needs help and is innocent, or is there more dire, scenario behind it?
Or do an encounter that ties to someone's backstory, but isn't the highlight of the story at that moment. For instance, we were on a trek through the High Forest to the Star Mounts, and that was tied to our Goliath's character. However, along that journey, they ran into some elves from Evermeet, which is the secret islands of elves, and they overheard those elves talking about the High Court losing its queen and someone being the new elected queen, and the sister of the elf that was in the party is amongst those names. And so it's just like one of those moments where it's like, tension building, but there's nothing they can do about it at this moment. Something that's kind of cool, like, oh, hey, by the way, this is also happening in the world.
Another thing that we utilize that helps make things is make death matter.
Oh, yes.
So we have a homebrew resurrection rules where it's not just like, because once you hit a certain level, you're like, whatever.
As long as I have the diamonds,
as long as I got the money. Yeah.
So one of the things
I'm invincible.
One of the easiest things that most people do is they just make diamonds extremely scarce in their game.
Yep.
Extremely hard resource to find. Either make it stupid expensive,
or just hard to find.
Hard to find because either throughout the ages of adventurers and
everybody used them all.
Everybody's used them all. But for us, we're like, cool, you found the diamonds. However, you're going to have to do a ritual.
Yep. The
player that died is going to have to talk to the god of death, whoever that is in your game. So in 5th edition, it would be Kalimvor. And you have a conversation. Forgotten Realms, yeah. You have a conversation with... so you have that moment instead of just... Because typically what it is the person that's dead sits back, even in the ritual, everybody else gets to roleplay, they don't get to do anything. So if they get a one-on-one conversation with the god of dead, and they all have a ritual, whatever you want that ritual to be, you can use ours, come up with your own.
But we basically, the players themselves try to convince the spirit to come back. So it immerses everyone into that and really makes it feel... really, really emotional and special. And it's like, what do you put forth to bring back, to convince the spirit to return? And it can be a story, it can be a poem, it can be an item, it can be a memory that you have with this person. And
it could be just a pleading of grief.
Yep.
Of being like, you can't leave yet because you have this unfinished business, or, I didn't feel like I had family until I met you. Something like that.
Things like that. And
but we also add the next line, which is it allows the player that died to also have a choice, because mechanically we have the diamonds, you're coming back, too bad, so sad. There's the choice.
The choice, yeah. It's like, do you want to come back? Cool. You come back. Do you not? Okay, cool. You're gone forever.
So one of the questions we have the God of the Dead ask them is, do you want to return, or is it your time to move on? And that lets them have that choice.
And then we put another facet to where which is a mechanic that we got from LARPing, and it was utilized in Resurrections and the LARPs that we played and ran. And we have a bag of marbles, and there are 3 different colors. There is, we use green, red, and black. Green is everything's good, spirit comes back, no complications.
Yeah, we call those life marbles.
Yep.
Then there's the black marble,
which is final death. You pull that.
Doesn't matter. You
don't come back. It is your time. Your spirit has done its thing. The God of Death said, nope, that's it. You're done.
And then those increase every time you die. You add another black marble to that bag, so it increases your chances of being your final death. The last one is red, and that's kind of like a complication, but we call it a bargaining marble, as what you have bargained with death in order to come back.
And that you come back changed in some way. We have in our rules, we have 50 various random table that you can roll on.
Some are boons, some are banes.
Yep. And so it just and there's mechanic that every time you assist in a ritual, you add a red marble or a bargaining marble to your bag, and so that way, because assisting in calling a soul, you put a little bit of your soul into them to bring them forth. And that's kind of how we do it. But
that's just ours. You can come up
with your own, anything like that,
or you can use somebody else's.
Yep.
We just making death mean something just adds a whole nother level to your game, and
it also helps them not go into every situation just, I'm invincible, rawr.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what I do, the consequences. Oh, it's death. Whatever. I've got 100,000 gold. I just gotta spend it and get resurrected. Whatever.
Now that is if you want the heavy emotional game. If in the beginning your players are like, we just want to be big old heroes and feel like superheroes in this world, then I would suggest using the standard of just having a component cost. And yeah, of course.
What about if they don't have the diamonds, but say they want to substitute the amount of gold for the material cost?
It's your campaign. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. At that point, yeah, maybe there would be a complication, or
double the cost of material.
Whatever. Yeah. Or they don't have the diamonds, but they're in a place where there's a temple, and they can go and donate to the temple, and they can resurrect them.
Yeah.
Things like that you can easily. I mean, come up with a reason. If that's the case, and you want to be able to substitute that for the material component cost, sure.
I will talk briefly about this because we hate this spell. Reincarnate. The reason why we don't like this spell is because every player they have this character, and their race a lot of times is really heavily influenced into their character's backstory and stuff like that. And Reincarnate, there's a big chance that it's going to change. There's a 50% chance that they'll become human if they're not human. So here's the caveat that I would say to that. You can change the rolls. The first thing I would say is that the roll 1 through 50 is not human. The roll 1 through 50 is the race they currently are. There's a 50% chance of them coming back as what they normally were, and then you can change.
Yeah, but again, it's also if your player or group are like, yeah, whatever, I'm fine, let's do it.
Yeah,
chaos. Let's come back as whatever. Cool.
Reincarnated as a dog.
It's what. Yeah, I mean,
if you really want to do that. Yeah.
Again, if your table is having fun, awesome.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's all about what your table's joy is. And if they want to be like, let's reincarnate, let's come back as let's let the Goliath come back as a gnome, and the Goliath is like, yeah, gnome. Then cool, great. Whatever happens. But if they're like, I don't really want to do this, but this is the only resurrection spell we have, work with it. You know, don't make it a bane against them. Make it okay. Well, let's find a way to compromise, and if you need to change up how the spell works, change up how the spell works.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, it's your table.
It's really what it all comes down to. Does anybody have any other questions? Yeah, of course.
How do you handle making custom creatures or making entirely new creatures?
It just depends on what you're looking to do.
Xenomorph dragon in one game store, and I was like, I kind of want to try and figure out how to use this. What stats would it have and stuff?
Oh, okay. Are you talking from the DM side, not a player being like, I want to be a Xenomorph dragon?
No, not like a DM, like it's custom monsters that aren't like in the monster manual.
Yeah, so find
monster manual monsters.
Start
albino red dragon.
Start with the template of similarities.
Yep.
So you already said it's a dragon. So start with a dragon as your base template.
What is it? Black dragons are acid?
Yeah.
I would start with a black dragon.
Xenomorph dragon. We'll go ahead and let's do that. Start with a black dragon. It already has acid. You can do one of two things. You could just take a black dragon and reskin it and just describe it as a Xenomorph dragon.
And your players would never know.
And your players will never know. It's just a black dragon. You could give it spider climb so that it can climb on walls and it can actually
First three things I would do: spider climb.
Yep.
Increase its stealth, and then anytime that it is attacked, it would do an acid splash. So like if you attack it with a sword or something, the player automatically takes like 2d8 acid from the amount of acid that.
Yep. Because of the corrosive skin.
Yep.
Roll a dex save to see if anyone hits you, I guess.
Oh no, it's just there are certain monsters that if you hit it with melee, you're so close.
Yeah, like fire elemental has that effect, and it's literally like if you hit it with a melee attack, then you take basically splash damage, and there's no way around it. It's just you hit it, you get hit.
Yep.
And it's usually small. It's usually a D6 or a D8. It doesn't need to be anything more than that, because if a fighter comes in with 2 attacks and action surges, that's 4 D6 of free damage that they're taking every time, if they hit it 4 times.
But those would be the 3 main things, because that feels to me that's xenomorphic, and if you have the dragon stats already, that's cool. You can get into the real nitty-gritty. Oftentimes when you get into the real nitty-gritty, it's going to bog down your combat, because you're going to be like, oh, wait, hold on, let me look. I remember that there was this thing, and you got to find it again.
Yep. But think of when building homebrew monsters, look for other creatures that have similar effects of what you're trying to build, and just put that into, put the mechanic in, but just change the I guess description of what it is, or the ability name, and utilize that, because at the end of the day, it's all templates. Everything is a template of each other when you create these monsters, and utilizing something similar will give you that idea of the CR, of what it's going to be, to know what to throw at your players depending on what level they are. And so, you don't want to create this CR 25 creature and your players are only level 8. And then it also, legendary actions. Does it have legendary actions? Let's put those in.
Does it have mythic actions?
Does it have mythic actions? Which is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Which which again makes boss fights feel amazing, where you go through, they kill it, and then it basically comes back at half its maximum hit points and now has mythic actions on top of legendary actions, and they basically have to fight it again.
That's wild.
Yeah, which was a mechanic that came out with Mythic Odysseys of Theros.
Now, to talk about the other thing that also happens many times, where people are like, I want to be a penguin that oozes grease. Looking at you, Logan. first start with an Aarakocra and change its fly to swim speed. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
The grease thing, I'd be like, you just have to have the grease spell. Boom, done.
Yep.
Now, other things, it can get more wild than that. Tasha's, I believe, came out with the Hex Blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Hex Bloods you can customize and do lots of awesome customary things.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. I also, like, if you're fairly new to homebrew building of like monsters and races and things like that, check the internet. Google it. Go to Reddit, the D&D. There's like a homebrew D&D one, and just ask for help. Be like, hey, I would love to do this. Anybody have any ideas? You're going to get a ton of ideas. Some good, some bad, but it'll at least give you a direction. And again, that kind of goes to that writer's room, where if you don't have someone to bounce ideas off, or if you're looking for additional help, go to the internet.
I'll go into a short story of the sense of I had some friends I know from a local haunted house, and I was like, hey, and they were like, hey, I want to play a game. I was like, cool, no problem. You can play whatever you want. I don't care. And I, in my brain, because I didn't communicate with my words well enough, meant anything from the book. Anything from the book is fair game, no problem. And
Any of the books.
Yeah, and the first one was like, I want to be a skeleton. And I was like, okay. And the next one was like, I want to be a vampire. I was like, that's more doable, but kind of powerful. And the next one was like, I want to be a were-yeti. And I was like, okay, all right. But I wish certain books existed and rules existed
back
then, because it would have made it a lot more balanced. But I created a campaign where there was a skeleton, a vampire, a were-yeti, a
blighter,
a blight queen, and then a dryad. So yeah,
and didn't make it a race, but made it almost like a curse, to where it was like once a day you could transform into this aspect of a monstrous being
for a minute or 10 minutes. I forget what it was, but I was like, okay, you have a limited amount of power that you can call
and not all the time.
So just things like that. Try when your players want what could possibly be game-breaking power. Just try and find a way to balance and communicate with them why you're making certain choices and things like that. Power gaming is fun for some people. It's not fun for story. So if they want to play the superhero game, cool. That's fine. Let them all be power gamers. If they're trying to play a narrative, power gaming is not as good, because then it's hard to find any consequences or high stakes.
And again, it comes back to communicate with your players. Any other questions?
Do you guys run your campaign in Adventures of Forgotten Realms, or your own homebrew world?
We run Forgotten Realms. D4 is one of, if not the most canon to Forgotten Realms lore. We try to really funnel that 20, 30 years of story that's there. It makes for a lot of prep, because we have to do a lot of backstory, like a lot of research into the lore, and to make sure that the threads that we're putting in are true to that.
That being said, though, there have been, I can't even count the number of times where it has been so serendipitous, where we're like, oh man, okay, let's see where they're going, blah, 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 blah. Let's look into the research of this, and we'll just kind of skim it real quick, and then there'll be keywords that pop, and we're like, how did this already exist?
It's exactly what we were already going and doing, and it's already there. So all we really have to do is plug it in, and it's done.
All the backstory and details are there. You have, a lot of times you have to change things, because most of the D&D wiki is up to it has a lot of it stops at 3rd edition, some of it stops at 4th edition, and then there was kind of a blurry time during there where there's some
4E
years
to 5e.
There's some years that are a little missing, so you have to fill in those blanks.
But it gives you a lot of backstory for that, and then also there's a lot of stuff that's just great, like it's just that doesn't really go into descriptions, and we fill that in. And we'll alter things here and there to fit our narrative, but for the most part it's fairly true to canon lore.
That being said, most people, they'll start with a campaign kind of like you did with the Fendelver, and then they'll just make it up and that's completely valid and fine. You don't have to stick to the lore that you started.
So on that, so D4, we started with Dragon Heist.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I went and did the Stream of Many Eyes, which was the release of Dragon Heist back in 2018.
Sure.
I want to say that was 2018. And I was like, I want to do an urban campaign. That sounds it. Let's utilize that. And so we took Dragon Heist, which is broken up into multiple villains, and you basically choose a villain to be your big bad.
That's the next one I'm going into with my characters. That's the question. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we took that and we gutted it, and we made him all the villains.
Yeah.
And we did all of them, and we broke the whole point of Dragon Heist is they're looking for the Stone of Golor.
Exactly. Yeah.
We broke the Stone of Golor up into 4 pieces, and they had to basically go through the entire campaign
finding the pieces. So there's the body, and then there's the 3 eyes, and so there were 4 aspects of the stone that you had to find and put them all together. And then there was like these other very intricate plot of finding the puzzle pieces that were the keys for the vault, and then that narrative on top of the 4 villains, which they were varying degrees of villainy. Some were more nefarious, others were more personal gain, others had a more they were being puppeted
and morally gray, as we like to say, which they were doing bad things but for good reasons or good intentions.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
And so you utilizing that, and then seeing which of the villains that the players push towards to really
well, it's not even which one they attach to and focus on that. They were all still there doing their thing. But some villains actually became allies because the players were like, hey, I know you want this, and I figured out why you want this. I can give you what you want differently if you give me the stone. And they're like, cool, no problem.
And that, and then in that our Dragon Heist lasted 98 episodes. So 98 sessions.
It's all on your stream.
All on our stream. Yep.
I'm gonna look through it and
please
make
do.
material.
It is. Yeah, we're currently on session 157, going into 158. It's about 700 to 800 hours of content. Each session is 4 to 5 hours. So we're definitely a binge show. We're podcast.
I will also say, earlier we talked about tapping into the ether and there's nothing new in the sun. So we came up with this idea, and then literally a month later, this amazing writer, he runs the Alexandrian, breaks down campaigns and makes them better or different.
And he did something similar, and so highly recommend checking him out and kind of seeing what he did, because he did something similar where he broke it apart.
When we saw the stone was broken apart into 4 parts, we were like, man, come on. But he did it brilliantly, so go check that out as well.
That's really great, because we're ending this starting campaign, and that's the module that I bought that we're going into. And you guys brought up a lot of great points, because one of the things I'm trying to put a lot of effort into is I want to give my characters their own personal backstories in the city, as well as their own tidbits and secrets they got going on with all the factions and stuff going on. But like you were saying, I'm having to put in attention and time to make sure the threads that I'm weaving don't go against the story and the narrative already in the module. So that was one of my big things, was like, if I'm deciding to go with Forgotten Realms and continue using these modules, how do I incorporate my characters where they have their own backstories with their own, stuff going on, but with the groove of the story.
I got something for that we didn't cover earlier. If you're running a module, read it 3 times. Before you run anything. The first time is just to understand what you're doing. The second time and third time is to break it down to see what you want to incorporate and what you don't want to incorporate, while also including the main story beats. Because you don't have to run everything that's in the book, and you probably won't run everything that's in the book. And then also, if you're like, oh, I kind of like this idea, but I know how to make it better because I want to incorporate a player's backstory, change it. Boom. As long as you have the gist of that's kind of like, take it as inspiration. And don't read the book as you're playing. That's really bad.
It 100% agree with that. And then utilize, so the great thing about that is, your characters will also build on that themselves as they start to get into it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's really what took so long with us to get through Dragon Heist, is because, you know, a good, I would say, third of it, if not half of it, was our players basically developing their characters through interactions with the various factions, the various, I mean, Waterdeep in itself is a character.
Yeah, it's a living organism. It's just
100%.
like it's like going to New York. New York has its different, instead of wards, it has its boroughs.
Yep.
And each borough, it feels different. It runs differently.
Yep.
The people have their own cultures in those areas,
Yep.
and that's exactly how Waterdeep runs with its different wards.
And
a lot of
guilds and you know, nobles and commoners and the field ward.
a lot of our time was spent just really bringing that world to life. You don't have to do that. You can kind of streamline things. Like, yeah, you're in a city, you're doing urban stuff, but if you really want your players, in our opinion, to really care about the setting and the NPCs,
Yep.
create those relationships.
Yep. Take the time to build those relationships. Don't just be like, you meet this NPC, it gives you this quest, you do this. Make that NPC matter. Make the city matter. Because for Dragon Heist, the city does matter.
Give them stakes in the city, like the house they get at the beginning, but make it, you know, even more impactful.
The alleyway, I would say, is more important than the house.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we pushed. I mean, because the alley itself becomes a living, breathing part of the campaign, because they basically become integrated in it, make the NPCs of the alley personable to the characters.
But also, so one of the things we did, I forget if it's in the book or not, it's been so long, but there are two shops right next to each other, Steam and Steel and the Bent Nail, and we had them not like each other in the beginning. Like, there was a contention, and they were like, why are these people not being cool? And it was just like, you're being a jerk. Oh no, they're being a jerk, right? And then they learned the backstory, and it was one of the characters was heartbroken, and it was hard to see the other shop because it was two lovers, and it was just like that painful reminder of what I've lost. And so that they were cold shoulder, and they took it the wrong way, and the players took it upon themselves to mend that relationship.
Yep.
And now they're all like really, really good friends and stuff like that. So that was like a really meaningful moment, and that's a small little note that ties the players into the characters.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you make all the MPs just like, oh, we're all friends already, then there's not really any stakes. There's not really any connection. However, there could be.
Yeah.
You know, it's up to you.
Yeah.
How your players want to play.
And like you said, tying the characters to the backstory, tying their backstories to the city. I mean, not everyone needs to be from the city. Like, I think only two of our players characters were from Waterdeep, and then one had connections to it. The other two, first time in there, just hadn't, and was just, you know, there to do, but give them a reason to be there.
Yeah.
You know, we had a knowledge, you know, a Paladin of Ogma. There's a very big Temple of Ogma there, the Font of Knowledge. Instant connection there. The other one was a wizard. Blackstaff Tower. Boom. Instant connection there.
Yeah, not everybody needs to be tied to one of the factions or the guilds.
Yep.
It's just extra bonuses. The factions have really cool side missions. If you want to incorporate that. And these are things that you can use in all of your different games. Hey, there are there's factions
I think there's 5.
in 5th edition. Forgotten Realms. And you can, or guild houses in Ravnica, stuff like that. You can have those kind of integrate themselves with the players and be like, hey, I have a mission for you because you're an adventurer, and then they can be incorporated into said faction or guild.
Yep.
And things like that.
I think you bring up a good point. Like, maybe not having the story be so much of just the interactions between the characters and the world, but also the world interacting with itself. They got to see it's a dynamic,
100%.
breathing thing.
100% that.
So,
Yep, absolutely. And let their consequences and ripples be felt throughout the city.
Yeah, not just in one centralized, like, oh, hey, we went against this one noble family, and that is the tight circle that it only affects. No. That noble family has ties to guilds because they fund them, or they run like the politics, or maybe they're a masked lord, and then like that can ripple even further, and they can see things like that because our players messed with some nobles, and the noble was like, "Cool, I'm gonna completely tank your business."
Yep.
Yeah. I can. You. Hey, you can't attack me. I can't attack you because those are the laws. But legally, I can get the guilds to take all of your licenses away and completely tank your business.
Then it becomes a different kind of combat. It's
Exactly.
like a political Game of Thrones kind of style.
Absolutely. And Dragon Heist can easily go into that political intrigue because of all of the guilds, the mass lords, and how the city runs.
Another question.
Now you got me thinking of, I once played in a campaign or game. I don't know if you know, Stars Without Numbers.
It sounds familiar. I haven't played.
It's a sci-fi setting, but it had mechanics. And basically, it's like thousands of years in the future, humans developed space travel, lost space travel, and regained it again. But the idea behind it was there was a mechanic in the game for the DM to have DM turns, where they'd roll stuff to see what all the various factions and stuff throughout the universe, or the sector, galaxy, limit were doing.
That sounds great.
Interacting with each other, and how the players' actions affected it.
Yeah, if they're
something like that.
That sounds great. Yeah,
if you can take the time to create those charts or borrow those charts from other games, you can do that. Yeah. Yes, that would be amazing. Sometimes random roll charts don't quite work. It feels kind of left field in the sense of what you rolled doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what we do is we
We'll
just look at the chart
and go,
and just that one. We don't need to roll it. Just be like, that one makes the most sense because of the actions.
DM that I played in a player once, but I've seen some YouTube video of someone running it once, and I assume somewhere in there it says your faction was doing it. Here's a chart you're supposed to look at, kind of thing. And
yeah, that's really cool, and that's a really, really fun mechanic.
Again, most things like that.
Also need help and prep and work.
Sure.
Yeah. Most things like that, and actually most things in D&D and any RPG that you play are guidelines. So not really hard rules. You're going to have some rules lawyers out there that want to stick to everything. But it's more fun if you just kind of
rule of cool
it.
But thought argument I actually have with the DM once said, if you change a major rule in the game, do you as DM feel that's your responsibility to let the players know before you start the game?
Yes, ideally.
I don't know if you've seen it, like a YouTube series called Gamers Darkness Rising.
Yes.
The DM does the whole thing of change it where the
We're very
players
familiar
being
with
cut
that.
off from their god, but he didn't tell the players.
Yeah.
They got bent out of
If
shape.
there is a-
Would you tell your
100%.
players about that?
If there's a homebrew rule that you have as a DM, let your players know that is a rule, like that is a mechanical rule change. Like for us, we have a homebrew crit rule where critical hits doesn't just double the dice, but the one like weapon die damage die is always max on your crit. So that way crits matter. You don't roll 2 1s, and it's like, well, my crit just did less than my second attack.
Right? It's the worst.
So if you're using a longsword, and you have a strength of 15 instead of a 2d8 plus 2, it would be 1d8 plus 10.
So
roll thing that I just finished watching the first box model came out where they like you can cast second level and low spells as a bonus action.
That's a homebrew rule, yep.
Yeah.
And so and something along those lines that your players absolutely need to know anything like that.
drinking potions is a bonus action instead of a full action.
Yep.
Use that one. Drinking a potion as an action is very lame, in our opinion. But going off of that, try and have most of your homebrew ideas set out at session 0.
Yep,
so you can establish with your players like these are the ones I like, these are the ones I don't like, and discuss why. If you come up with another one during play because players are like, this is kind of this feels not fun, and you want to change the rules a little bit, it's okay to incorporate it and see how it goes, and then discuss it afterwards if you want to continue that way.
Yep.
Rule change that DM that again I played and kind of changed the succubus in D&D. It says that if you succeed on your save against this charm ability, you can't be affected by it for 24 hours. They sort of on a whim. It's like if it hits the character, they had to make the charm roll again and failed it the second time.
Things like that, I would say, is okay in the instance because you're doing more of a, because I mean, I love changing up monster abilities because that makes the people who are playing are like, well, I know the monster manual front and back,
especially seasoned DMs.
Yep, and go, well, you don't necessarily know this, and changing up monster abilities and things like that to not work exactly as is okay in my opinion, because it keeps it fresh and it helps those who think they know what's going to happen not happen. But that's not necessarily a mechanical like full rules thing change. That would be more along the lines of monster balancing.
Yeah. Caveat to that though is don't do it to force something to happen. That goes into railroading again.
Or to be spiteful.
Or to be spiteful, because then that becomes DMs versus players. And if you are changing a monster stat heavily, either have that be the same for that monster across the board, or have that monster, that specific one, be special. Like that is a higher succubus or something like that. That's why they
like
have
a greater succubi or something like that.
Yeah, that's why they have the ability more often than a lesser.
Yep.
Things like that, just in case someone does feel like things are unfair and you have a narrative reason.
Yep.
But I mean, that's gonna feel that way sometimes as a player. You're gonna feel like it is DM versus players because there are some monsters in there that are really hard. You just have to be fair and have those communications, and as long as there's an open communication, then you should feel comfortable at the table.
While we're on the subject of rules, I do have another question for you. I have a group of other player characters. I have 3 other player characters, and I'm the dungeon master. Do you have any tidbits or advice for working with a smaller group of characters? Because they don't have any kind of healers. None of them even use spells. So I do use the ruling for the bonus action drinking potion to help them gain back health. But is there any other like rules changes that you know off the top of your head that would help a smaller group deal with some of these issues a little bit better than a
2 things. One, make healing potions more abundant.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and or cheaper if you have to.
Yep.
Or just find them a lot.
Yep.
Or you can use, I think it was Tasha's again. They incorporated sidekicks.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have introduced some familiars and sidekicks to help them in certain situations.
Yep. And you can give them that.
Yeah, give them the role of that so
Yep.
they have more agency
Yep.
in things. So.
Or a NPC PC. And I wouldn't put that NPC PC in there for the entire campaign, but like for
Yes.
a small arc. Oh,
Yes.
hey,
You have a cleric now that's going to be with you, and make sure that they have, like, you don't grind them as much, like hitting them with a counter after encounter after encounter. Give them time to short rest to long rest in between, hitting them with encounters, so that way they don't feel,
Or if you do encounter, make it very light encounters. So it would be the equivalent of like a normal encounter over 3. Just make sure that your stuff's balanced. That's really
And I think just as long, especially if there is no magic user among them, it's okay to throw a couple like arcane magical traps at them or magical encounters at them, just to hit them with a little something, but make there always be a mundane a way around it.
Yep. Like the spell Arcane Lock can be forcefully broken. It's a high strength check, or athletics check, but it's still mundanely breakable. So just make sure that you always have something that non-magic users can do as well.
Yep.
Maybe not every time.
A wall, you shoot an arrow at it, breaks the writing or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they encounter the biggest one with that is like if no one has the ability to fly or get long range, put in a means to bring whatever is keeping out of reach, because nothing more fun than just a barbarian with no ability to get, or a melee combatant with no ability to be like, well, that's me. I'm just down here.
I'm gonna piggyback off of this and go into puzzles, because that's the out of game mundanity that oftentimes causes games to slow to a halt. Certain times you want to have fun and be a little conniving DM and be like, ha ha ha, how are you going to get past this evil door? Doors are the worst. But sometimes you'll have a puzzle and there will be a single answer. Those are bad puzzles. What you want is a puzzle that is the hopeful answer that they figure out, have multiple clues to give them that answer. But it's also good to have a secondary answer and then a third that's empty that says whatever cool thing they come up with. Because if they come up with a clever way to disable your puzzle, it works.
And I would say if there is you can't think of other options, put in a means of ability checks or skill checks to allow them to get closer to that. And make an intelligence check, make an insight check, an investigation check, and slowly give them more clues until if it's just if it's been enough, it's starting to come into circles and they're stumped, have them make a check and give them the answer and get through it.
Also, hint towards traps, because unless it's I guess Strahd's castle, most ancient tombs and temples and stuff like that have been encountered other adventurers or tomb raiders and stuff like that. They've probably triggered a trap or two. So if they see a pit trap with some skeletons in it, right? Oh, we should be mindful of pit traps, and then that teaches them to roll a perception or investigation check. Another one that we had was a room filled with sand with two adamantine doors kind of broken open, and they're like, huh, that's strange. And then they went into a room and it was filled with treasure, and then they touched something, the doors closed and it started to fill with sand. They're like, we should have seen this coming.
The breadcrumbs.
Yep, exactly. Always.
Yep.
Just so, because it's better to be to have the player realize their mistake than to feel like you swept the rug from underneath their feet. Yeah.
And that's how you go from just having the game come at them as opposed to them being a part of the game.
Yeah.
Is let them piece those things together.
Yep.
So yeah.
And it's always more fun to watch them go.
Yeah. Incorporating the crop ideas, go out, buy it to a Dollar General store and buy one of the 10 or 20 piece little kids puzzle things, put it together, flip it upside down, put it together, and draw something you want your characters to find the back of it, and then break it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just give them the pieces here and there.
I'll let you know, kids puzzles are the best puzzles for D&D because your players will overthink them more so than you expect them to, and that will draw out time. Also, it is a length of time that feels narratively appropriate for in-game versus out-of-game, because you can give them a really cool take-home puzzle if you so wish, but that let them solve it out of game, because otherwise you're going to slow the game to the halt. It's typically one person that's focusing on the puzzle, and then it's not fun for anybody else. Second part, make puzzles that incorporate everybody.
Yep. Or multiple facets of the puzzle that incorporate everybody.
Yeah. And then recently we had a one-shot run by Lucia Versprilli, fantastic DM, and she had this very simple cipher puzzle, right? And then it was a turn the dial, match this symbol, it gives you a letter, right? One person had that. One person had another aspect, was basically writing it down, and another person was solving another aspect. And it was all three parts of one singular puzzle that one person could do, but it was more fun with the
broken up. And then even another thing to do with puzzles.
Decoder ring from A Christmas Story, and the kids
Remember
to drink your Ovaltine.
Yep, is take an hourglass and put it on top of your DM screen and watch the players freak out. Even if it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything but make them psychologically think that something is going to happen when it comes out. They're going to make that puzzle go a lot quicker.
If you want a kids toy or kid's puzzle to have higher stakes, bring out a minute timer, and at the end of that minute timer, they take some damage or something happens
something
that
triggers.
increases the stakes, and they're panicking, which makes their brain overload and not figure out the puzzle.
Door opens and walks a skeleton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna touch on another thing that we haven't gotten into yet, and that is in combat, and that is utilizing maps or theater of the mind. So there are several facets to the maps. There is the old grid, grid paper or wet erase mat that you can use, and you just draw your shapes on and squiggly lines and whatnot.
Sometimes enemies are M&Ms.
Yep, or pennies or Legos, and that's okay. Other times there is full builds of 3D terrain and miniatures and monsters, and all of that. And that's when your how far away am I? I only have this much movement. All of that combat mechanics really come into play because you have the grid, you have that in front of you. And you can really utilize that.
There are certain feats and subclasses and classes that rely very heavily on the grid system, and it's good to have that for them. However, there's also Theater of the Mind, which is faster paced, more fun. The first thing you have to know with Theater of the Mind is be extremely descriptive. Also, let players add to the scenery. Let's say you're in a grand hall, right? Great feast hall. And they're like, is there a chandelier? Of course, right? So I'm going to cut the rope and the chandelier is going to fall on somebody, right? Maybe you didn't have that in mind, but it's something they've added to the scene. It makes it really cool. And that's really where Theater of the Mind super thrives, is because it is super yes and.
Yeah. Also, when you theater the mind, just be loose on placement, because it's hard to determine, hey, am I 10 feet away or am I 30 feet away? It's just, you can get close enough, unless it's like a 120-foot chamber. It's like, well, you got to move, at least double your move, and then the next turn you'll be close enough. But it's just let them have fun and really just kind of move along in that with the descriptions. Let them describe things and really have fun with it.
When I do Theater of the Mind, I typically draw like a quick, I don't even need to draw the grid. I just have the layout shape of the room, and I'm like, okay, this player's here, this player's here, and this player's here, just so I know if they're like, I do a fireball, like, okay, I know generally kind of like who's there and who's not. And
it just helps on the DM side just to kind of mentally know where people are in the room, especially if the party decides to split up and go to the four corners of the room. And you're like, okay, well, if the wizard fireballs, well, one of the party members is getting hit at least.
The other problem with Theater of the Mind is everybody has their own image in their head. So you just have to be mindful of that. That's why you have to be loose.
If you're using a module or something that's pre-written and it has its own map on there and you don't have a grid and you're using Theater of the Mind, utilize that just for you so that you have your placement of things and then describe everything and let them to be descriptive. But then you have that, okay, well, I know where people are and I'm going to move things around on my end, but it's all loose and Theater of the Mind for everybody else.
There are a bunch of really great resources out there if you want to do a more immersive visual experience. There's some really cool gridded mats. I know Meeple has some really awesome ones, even if they're not gridded. And then you can just have scatter terrain, whether they be flat or 3D. That's really cool. Or you can do what WizKids and Dwarven Forge and we do, and that is a really elaborate, beautiful map that really immerses the player visually.
The WizKids Warlock Tiles are amazing. They have multiple facets of interior and like exterior streets. And they're just really, really, really good, quick. They click together, they stay together, and you can literally just Lego them into various shapes and rooms and facets of everything that you want.
The beauty of those is they're really awesome and beautiful, and you can take them apart, store them away, and then build something new the next day. But they're expensive. The Warlock Tiles are a lot cheaper than Dwarven Forge, but sometimes you don't even have that amount of money. So what we do is we take really cheap materials from like Dollar Tree and Home Depot with XPS foam and carve it out of that. Where you're sacrificing money there is time.
Yep.
Time is money.
And space.
And that's the second
They
part.
don't break apart. You can build these elaborate maps and things, but then you have a 25-inch map that you don't know what to do with because, you know, and after, you know, the 18th or 19th one, you stack floor to ceiling and
Start selling them on eBay.
you know.
You
would think
the
that.
problem is shipping cost because of the sizes of them.
Yeah.
So if you come to Meeple's Bazaar, sometimes we have our maps here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can come and get a screen used D4 map. That's really awesome. Please get it out of our house.
Please.
But they're beautiful. They fully immerse the players, and it's a lot of fun. And you really know where the characters are on the board for any time that someone's like, I have a set amount of movement, or I have an AOE type of situation.
Another great asset are VTTs, virtual tabletops. There is Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, Alchemy. There's a whole bunch of them out there that are just phenomenal, and you can utilize them remotely, or you can even utilize them at the table, and you can have either
a projector or a
screen, you know, a table, or you can just have a TV next to you.
Yep.
Where you have it connected to your laptop, so you know. So okay, I'm going to show you here. So now you can see where everybody is, and kind of utilize it like that, or have them have their laptops open at the table, so they have the VTT in front of them, so that they can still see it, but you're still at the table in one place.
Yeah, we have a TV built into a custom frame.
Yep.
About a 40-inch we put on the table, and then I'll bring up the generic maps from the Wizards content, and I'll put actual interactable objects and things on the map for them. But I find that that's good for big things, but for some smaller things, I try doing theater because I think a mixture keeps things fresh for them, and it lets them know that the important things are for the TV and for the scenery.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That happens to us as well. We try to build a map for every encounter. That's impossible. There will be times where players are like, oh, nope, we're doing this now. And we're like, okay, cool, theater of the mind it is, because we did not expect that to happen. Players are going to surprise you. Another thing.
Map set up that you can use. Like, it's a forest. Like, it's a little map with a bunch of trees on it.
Again,
Sometimes
what
you
we're
get
kind of
planted
getting
in the
into now is like once you've established like your style and your comfortability, we're kind of getting more into the elaborate DMing. And the next thing we're going to talk about is immersion in the sense of handouts, things like that.
Yeah.
There's this really cool company called Beetle and Grimm, and they make these boxes that are filled with the whole campaign guide, handouts, monster cards, little trinkets, custom. Sometimes they have little plushies and things like that.
But things like that are great, and I mean, even if you don't do that, but you know, having like if you have like your characters, they're gonna find a missive or a note left behind. Type it up, print it out, hand it to them. Even if it's not like aged or just like or anything, it's just a piece of it. It's still giving them that handout. It allows them to physically hold it, and it saves you time from having to spell out every line on it because they're like, all right, what does it say? As they try to copy it, you can literally just hand it right to them.
And then there's if it has clues to further things down the road, they can quick reference them themselves instead of you trying to find that note that you wrote ages ago. Right.
But if you want to like really make it immersive, you know, take it, print it out, tear the edges, tea dye it, literally take some bags of tea, put it in some water, put the paper in it, let it sit for a little bit, and then let it dry, and then it really has like a nice textury feel to it, and you can really give it to them, and they're like, oh no, wow, this looks like it's 100 years old.
Do the same thing for like temple and ruin maps. Maybe there was an archaeologist that went in there but only made it so far, and they realized that they missed some rooms behind them, or there's like unfinished pathways, so don't give them the whole map but give them a partial map. Or if they go to a new city like Baldur's Gate, you see it over there, not on screen. But
you want to see this, come to Meeple Madness.
But
and see what I'm pointing to off camera.
That is something that Beetle and Grimm created, but you can also create something similar just off a piece of paper and be like, hey, welcome to the city of Baldur's Gate. For anybody that's new, here's a map.
Yep.
Costs 3 gold. Because we're gonna upcharge you. Something that should be like 2 copper.
Yeah.
Tourist tax.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions over here? No, feeling good. All right. Any questions in Twitch land
Yeah.
coming in from the Twitch chat?
We'll have Dave say that to us.
Yeah, there were a couple of people asking how long D4 has been on stream. It's been 4 years now?
Going into year 4 in January.
Yeah, so 3.
So yeah,
But
3,
going to
cool,
4.
But yeah, our January of 2023 will be our 4-year.
Yeah, because we started in January 2019.
Yep.
And you guys stream every Sunday here?
Every Sunday, and you can find it. We're on Twitch on D4RPG. It's 7 p.m. Eastern time, and then you can VODs are put on YouTube and our YouTube and all that. D4DNDRPG.com for all of that.
It has all of our information, links to our Patreon, all of our other social medias.
But we're podcast as well. The podcast releases on Friday. The YouTube video VOD video on demand drops on Thursdays of the following Sunday.
Yep.
But yeah, 4 years, a phenomenal cast of players. Just I mean, yeah, we got lucky with our players. They're just there are times where we just sit back.
They
just have at it.
Heavily invested into their characters, very emotionally roleplay driven. And it's funny, it's sad, it's scary. It has the whole gambit, I will say it skirts the line a couple of times, but we do play it safe just for anybody that wants to come to view.
Yeah, there's content warnings when it gets it gets rough. We're a horror.
Yeah, a horror-based game, and our BBEG is Far Realm,
which is Lovecraftian
creatures that are canon to the Forgotten Realms, because that was kind of something we wanted to do.
Yep.
And
it was a lot of fun when we were doing Dragon Heist. We broke it up, but we also were breadcrumbing in the overarching homebrew narrative that we had written as well, and tied even some of the villains to that, so that way when you have that
so when we changed
direction at the end of
makes
it
sense. It's not sudden.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do with it sounds exactly what I'm trying to do with my campaign for that too. So
it's great.
Definitely.
Again, cannot attest to the little breadcrumbs if you're trying to do a major long form narrative. Level 1 to epic levels of 15 to 20, which are 5th edition epic levels. Put in those breadcrumbs early. Put in those breadcrumbs in session 0, so that way, from the beginning, when it finally is revealed, there's few things more just rewarding than watching a player's face just change as the light bulb
Finally, that's the thing I'm always
flickers
looking
and
for.
turns on.
And the way to get there is breadcrumbs.
Yep.
Yes.
Not obvious clues, but clues that are obvious when you look at them as a whole.
Yep.
And then you have your player either figure it out or kick themselves and go, why didn't I figure it out?
Yep. There's definitely the times where you have the player that just is like, oh my goodness. And then there's times where the player, realizes it, gets up, walks out, and then it's just mad at themselves because they didn't see it staring right in front of their face. And either reaction is just...
That's one of the things I've learned to love as becoming a DM is that I see my wife is one of the characters, and our 2 best friends are the other characters. And I've really seen them grow into their own with each character. They've really associated themselves with progressing this character and seeing where this character goes. So when we finished this last campaign and they got to the big arc, they felt the tension building up. And, some of these, my characters really felt emotional as there were some very emotional points. And those are the things I look for as a DM, and I'm trying to build on and get better at.
Just like in every story, there should be, like, small arcs and then an overarching. So it's not one, you have to have...
Yeah, you don't want to always hit them all the time because then they're going to get burnt out. There has to be that, you got to build them up for hope so that you can break it.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
But also there should be small arcs within the big arcs that build upon the bigger story, and so they feel like they accomplished something, or there's a big consequence to that. It's acts in a play. So there's like typically 4 or 5 acts or 3 parts to a story, and stuff like that. So
one of the things I want to touch on is, when you're DMing, if you are telling an emotionally immersive story, there is something called bleed, and that is when your players or even you as the DM feel the emotions of the character you're portraying on a personal level, as you the player feel what your character is feeling. That is both good and bad at times, because if you are, as a DM, telling a story so immersive that your players are heartbroken and or afraid or whatever, and they are or angry, that can bleed over into the real world, which, as a storyteller, that is what I try to push for at any given time, where I'm telling a story so immersive that my players feel what their characters are feeling. Same thing when you're watching a movie or a TV show.
Or like when you're reading a book and you get to a point and your favorite character dies and you just have to put the book down because you are feeling grief, right? The beauty of a book is you can put that down, and sometimes in a game you don't realize that you're having those emotions because you're just so invested. But if you do realize that, and you're like, hey, I need to step away from the table, that's okay.
Yeah, let them do that and let them know that. And it's like, hey, if at any point or after a intense scene or an emotional scene or encounter or a character death or something along those lines where emotions are heavy on any form, anger, like if there is PvP or an argument between players or even NPC in that, and emotions get heated and heavy in any form of the adjective emotion or the feeling of an emotion, tell them, hey, if you need to take a break, step away, take a second for yourself. Or if we need to call the session here, let's call it here, and then let's take a breather, let's talk about it, let's just relax and come off of those, decompress, as I like to call it.
That can either be a conversation or it could be a quick board game that's fun and
a video game, something fun, just to take that emotional, or go out and get a Waffle House or ice cream or something along those lines and come off of it, of that emotional high, if you will,
because those emotions can carry on into the real world, and especially like anger. You don't want any animosity breeding at your table, whether it be DMs and players or players and players. Because it's a game. You're supposed to be having fun and stuff like that. And it's okay to get angry. Yeah. Right? That's a legitimate feeling that everybody has in the real world. And it's okay if your character has that as well, because that feels real. And they can lead to some beautiful, amazing moments, but they can also be very heavy moments where people get really invested into their character. And you just need to remember that we're all here to have fun, and bleed is okay, just as long as you're healthily taking care of yourself, your mental state and emotional state.
And as a DM, allowing your players that reprieve from those moments, letting them know it's okay to take a break, to step away. If you need a moment, take it. Once the scene's over, we'll take a pause, we'll eat some snacks, we'll take a quick little break, see where everyone's at, and we'll either jump back into it, or we'll call it for the session and we'll come back next time, and we'll take the however long we are in between sessions to kind of figure out where to go from here, or yada yada yada.
Doing that and having that communication and that separation and stuff like that breeds a level of safety and comfort at your table, where people will get more invested. They'll give more to your game than if you don't allow them that reprieve, because then they'll just have a bad taste for the game.
Or they'll feel like that they can't fully express themselves because there may not be that outlet. So just letting them know.
They'll put a wall up. They'll be like, okay, I'm angry, cool. My character's angry. I say that I'm angry. And they're not fully invested. But that's also okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just saying, if you want to get to that full immersive, if you have to have the safety tools that are there. Was that? Have fun. Another thing is, in order, like, narratively to have that, sometimes you want to start light, get real heavy, and then end the session light as well. Because if you end the session on a heavy note, Like I said, if you have the time to have those conversations after game or the levity, cool. But having the game end on a heavy note and then be like, okay, cool, we'll see you next week, it's not the best, because then you're sending people out into the world still stewing in those emotions and things like that. And you want it to be a remembrance of those emotions, not a continuance of those emotions. Because then they'll look back and be like, man, that was awesome. I was so pissed off at this moment, or I was so scared, or like, man, I'm really reeling still from that heartbreak. But, it was a really cool moment, versus like going home and be like, oh, this game, like,
Yeah. So that way it's character versus character, not player versus player.
Yeah.
Is really what it should always be. And it's that making sure that those players are like, hey, after that moment, they're like, oh, it's like, you good? Yeah, I'm good. Or, no, I need a minute. And like, okay, cool. Take the time, yada, yada. So that way it's all in play and things like that.
Anybody have any other questions?
I see there's one in the chat from Galaxy Ghost Girl, who asks, should you try and plan for a longer session even when it could be short? I wouldn't. I think that having more written is going to be easier on the DM front than not having enough written, because you can always stop and then pick up at that.
There have been many times where we planned for a whole lot and got through maybe somewhere between a tenth or up to a half of it, because the players want to roleplay, or they fixate on one aspect of the story, which is fine. That means we have a whole lot prep for next week.
Yep.
Woo!
Yep.
Less work.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. We're a long form narrative, and been going for almost 4 years, and I think with that in mind, we don't ever want to stop our players from role playing. There are times where like, man, well, we thought that we were going to get to this point by this time, but that's not going to happen for at least another month.
Piggybacking off of that real quick, if your players are role playing too long, in the sense that they keep talking in circles, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're taking too long to figure out, or if they're taking too long planning, put a time restraint, or something interjects into the story. Just boom, surprise, let's keep the game going.
Yep.
But you don't want to do that all the time, and you don't want to do it too early or too late,
Yeah, it's basically they're saying the same thing, and they're like at the fourth time where it's the same thing but in a different phrase. Then
Arguing about where to go.
something along those lines. Yeah, and it's just then it's you can put a narrative shove into it, or
an
just,
interjection or something that just ends the conversation and forces them to make a decision.
Or if there's an NPC there, you have them interject and be like, well, what about if we just do this, yada yada yada.
Yeah,
something along those lines.
And then also prepping. It's okay if you don't have enough prepped, then just either make it up as you go along, or have something fun, and usually lighthearted is the best way to fill those.
Ask your players,
hey,
the floor's yours. What do you guys want to do?
Yeah.
The evening is yours to do as you see fit, and just go off of whatever they want to do.
Earlier I said make sure you read the campaign. If you're not making a full homebrew, if you're running something out of a book, read it 3 times. That's also so that you know what the next step in the story is. And even if you're not fully prepped, you can either hint towards or step into that next part of the story.
Yep. Another great resource is the DM's Guild, which is an incredible site that has a bunch of homebrew just modules, connections to pretty much every released Wizards content. There is someone who has created side quests and other formats to make it more, to broaden it more. So check out those, even if it's not connectedly tied to that story. Just taking like, hey, here's a one shot that you literally can just take and plug in as a side quest here or there. It's a great resource.
Surprise, there's also official WotC released digital content only on dmsguild.com, so you can't get it in hardback.
Yep.
Maybe you can, but you have to specifically order it from DM's Guild.
Yes.
But a bunch of great resources, and if you don't have an idea, DM's Guild, Reddit, forums on D&D Beyond, all of that. They have ideas.
So someone on Twitch chat has a question. Fantasy Animal Vegan asks, do you have tips for when someone does a perception check, rolls low, and then someone else wants to do a perception check because they know that person failed their check? So something that we implement on D4 is the rule of 2. And that is to help with things like that, is that we only allow 2 people to roll at a time. And so
that it can either be represented as one person rolling with advantage,
Yep.
or 2 people rolling separately.
Yep. Also, utilize passive perceptions.
Yep.
Unless they are actively looking, they don't know. It is literally just, they have passive perceptions there. It's 10 plus your perception score. And it just, you just say, this is, this character sees this, and if they're like, but why didn't I see it? And you can say, it's because their passive perception is a little higher.
And if you want to not give away the whole, cake, I guess you could say, for the person that has the high passive perception, say you notice this small thing. You notice a cloak of someone dip into an alleyway. And then they'll go, okay, now I want to roll perception, and you can give them more information, stuff like that.
Yep.
But if they roll low and someone metas that, hey, I have a better perception score, that goes into the rule of 2, but then we hard stop it.
Yeah, or come up with a narrative reason why that person wouldn't, because like, well, you were having a conversation with this, so it's basing it off of your passive perception because you weren't actively perceiving, where this character who was scouting was actively perceiving.
Yeah.
That way, their perception score is still being utilized, but it is the passive score, not the
If
active
someone does a
perceiving.
meta, then use their passive versus an active.
Yep.
That's also
And
good.
that is how I would do that.
Things for any like history checks or perceptions that we would want, information that you want the players to have, and may stop the game, just give to them.
Yeah, don't make it a check. Only do that for like bonus stuff that could give them a little bit more of a clue. But if it's something that like like the players need to know this, don't put a roll behind it.
Yeah.
Just give it to them. Either they find it in text, or an NPC gives it to them, or if it's someone's like, just give it to someone who is from a certain area that might do it, or is a knowledge person, or yada yada.
Or it ties into their background, like, oh, you remember this.
We actually like to utilize passives for all skills, and just be like, hey, what's your passive history check? 10 plus this roll. That's just knowledge that you've picked up over the years, and that you just know without having to make a roll to try and remember, and then we can give those. And we also do it for medicine checks. For someone who has a actual like proficiency in medicine, what's your passive medicine? 10 plus, it's 15. Cool. You can look and you can see that they have a pulse. Like you can immediately feel that they are still alive and do that, or you get a quick glance and you can see that blood loss probably is enough to bring them to unconscious status, or to bring them to bleed out.
A lot of times we use passive medicine in combat, because players are like, how bad do they look? What's your do you want to spend an action and do an actual full medicine check, or do you want to just do a quick look and get vague information?
They look bad.
They look bad.
Or
They look, or using was it 3-5 or
bloodied?
It's
4th edition.
Yeah. And they look bloodied, which is lower than half their health.
Something along those lines, where it's not giving them the full like, oh, the monster doesn't, is going to be up for a while, but it's a quick nudge, like, oh, well, I mean, they've taken some hits. They have some cuts on them, some scrapes. They've got battered armor. You can see bruising coming up. Things like that, where it's just a little bit of utilizing in a quick thing to help build that immersion as well, because it helps paint the picture of how bad what they're fighting, or how bad their allies are looking. Things
Also
like that.
put those kind of descriptions into the combat themselves. Like you see the person like stagger up from a knee, raising the greatsword with a shaky hand.
Yep.
That lets the players know, okay,
probably in single digits.
Yeah, they're not doing so great.
Where they basically go to a knee, or they innards are coming, and trying things like, depending on how descriptive and how I guess rated your game is, if it's just they take some hits, then that, if you're running a game for kids or what have you, then
that's better to describe with like taking a knee and then like being shaky and things like that. I think it's
don't
a little
get
bit
too gory or anything with it.
If you want to get gory with the more adult crowd, then make those descriptions of holding themselves together.
Yep.
And
then you can get fun reactions from your players, like, oh
yeah.
You guys just hit on a big, very aha moment for me as a DM, was me realizing that finding that fine balance between requiring rolls and not requiring rolls.
Yep.
The passive and then the active, knowing when it's needed and not needed.
Yep.
Rolls should only be utilized if it is a fail scenario or an extra bonus scenario.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, and you can even put your, especially for knowledges, put it into to steps where it's like, okay, at 5 to 10 you get this you get this little bit of information. 11 to 15 you get a little bit more. 16 to 20 you get all of it.
Yeah.
So that way, even if it's they don't roll as high, they still get the basis of it, and then they can delve, depending on how well they roll, depends on how much more you get.
And also skew your DCs to the rarity of the knowledge that they're looking into. If it is a creature from a different plane that they have never been to or heard of, that's going to be a really high DC.
Yep.
And just let them know that it's better to let them know on the front end, like, hey, yeah, of course you can roll an Arcana or a Nature or a History, but it's going to be really high DC. If they know that before they roll, they'll feel better about failing, even with a high, like, oh, I rolled an 18, what did I get? DC was a 20.
Yep.
So, and they'll be like, okay, you told me it was going to be hard. That's okay.
Yep.
But as long as they feel, as long as they had a chance. And then if they do roll high enough, give them something. Oh, hey, you saw an advertisement for some strange Fey carnival that talked about this displacer beast, and that looks very similar to the panther-like creature that's standing in front of you right now.
Yep. Also, it's okay to sometimes just give it to them. Like, if they come close enough to that DC, just and just give it to them. Like, it's okay for them to get, even if it's the lowest one. Like, if it's DC 15, they roll a 13 or a 14. Just give it to them, it's all good.
Or even half of it.
Yeah.
If you're just like, just so they feel like they got something.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is a hard no, and that's okay too.
It is, yeah. That does happen. But I believe that is time. Any last minute questions over here before we call? All right. That is, thank you all so much for joining us for this How to DM panel at Meeple Madness. Thank you out in internet land for following along, and hopefully we were able to give a little insight and answer some questions that you had out there.
Hopefully this helped you. And if not, the only thing that you need to take away is, if your table is having fun, you are DMing correctly.
Yep. Period. End of story.
That's it.
That's it. Thank you so much. I am Dustin Fletcher.
I'm Devin Henderson.
We are the Codiums of D4, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys. Woo!